Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So tonight we're going to start a little study into Corinthians. It's going to be a series of studies over quite a while because there's a lot of it. So we're going to be doing that, and I'm going to be doing other stuff between the studies on Corinthians. So, we're going to be taking a closer look at the instructions, counseling, and guidance that were given in writing to the Corinthians. But before we get into that, we need to know a little bit of background about the book. The author was Paul the Apostle. The writing is in the style of which Paul wrote, and the description of Corinth and of its people fit the era in which Paul ministered. The date we're uncertain about, but it is believed to have been written around AD 54 and 56. In the history books, Clement of Rome referred to the Corinthian letter in a letter that he wrote around AD 96. Ignatius and Polycarp in Christian history often quoted from the letter around AD 155. It's believed Paul wrote this letter while on his third missionary journey. Paul began that journey through Galatia, as is recorded in Acts 18:23. Afterwards, he went to Ephesus for his 3-year ministry and the writing of 1 Corinthians. This would place the writing of this letter in the mid-50s. To whom written, as indicated in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 2, it was written to the church of God in Corinth, to those sanctified in Christ Jesus. Now, why was the letter written? So there's 3 reasons for that. 1, to draw the church back together in a spirit of unity as one body in Christ, because the church was severely divided and split, feuding and arguing and forming cliques. 2, it deals with moral laxity in the church. 3, to answer certain questions about the church, or that the church had, Some of these questions concern marriage, Christian liberty, and rights, public worship, spiritual gifts, and resurrection. Corinth was the capital of Achaia, located at the southern tip of Greece. It was on a narrow strip of land, only 4 to 5 miles across, almost like an island. This provided 2 natural harbors, one on the east coast and the other on the west coast. Corinth was a commercial paradise. All commercial travelers traveling north and south chose to travel through Corinth. It had a very large population, a mixture of nationalities including Greek, Latins, Jews, Egyptians, Syrians, and Asiatics. Being a prosperous city, Corinth was a sports-minded center. The Isthmian Games, considered the most important athletic events next to the Olympics, were held in Corinth. Corinth was morally corrupt. Because of the high population of traveling salesmen and material prosperity, Corinth was part city. Drunkenness and all sorts of immoral living was everywhere. The city's name even became a byword for evil and immoral living. They worshipped the goddess of love, Aphrodite. The temple housed 1,000 sacred prostitutes. Talk about an oxymoron. Corinth was an intellectual and cultural center. The pursuit of personal and pleasure was the norm. There was little recognition of the law. The population of the city has been estimated at about 500,000. So it's needless to say, but the city needed the gospel, guys. That's almost like a lot of cities that need the gospel. You know, the cities that have gang members that are out doing their norm. You know, God needs to be introduced to a lot of these cities. When Paul entered the city, we are told in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3, that he entered in weakness and fear and with much trembling. He might have been a little bit discouraged at all he saw. He was alone, and he was at the mercy of God. God met Paul's needs, like he meets all of our needs. Almost immediately, God brought Paul two believers to help him, Aquila and Priscilla. They were tent makers, but they were godly Jews who had been expelled from Rome by the Emperor Claudius. It wasn't long until Silas and Timothy returned to him, so encouraged and pressed in the Spirit. Paul entered the synagogue and began his ministry, testifying that Jesus is the Christ. He was so successful that the hostile Jews forced him out of the synagogue. That's a good problem to have. He moved next door to the home of a man named Justus, and this became his base of operations. God gave Paul a vision, assuring him that many people were to be reached for Christ. His ministry lasted 18 months. His largest number of converts were the Gentiles. So Corinth was a cesspool of immorality and the nightclub life in the ancient world. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26 through 29, and I will let you guys read that on your own. By the way, we're pretty sure that the 1 Corinthians was the second letter written to the Corinthians, because Paul mentions for the first letter he wrote that it had been lost. Paul was in Ephesus when he received a letter from Corinthians of the division and moral corruption within the church. That's when Paul answers their letter with the letter that we know as 1 Corinthians. Paul apparently then gets news that things got worse in Corinth, and so he makes another visit and writes his third letter to the Corinthians that has been lost. The letter is mentioned in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4, and chapter 7 and 8, which was delivered by Titus. In waiting for an answer to the third letter, Paul becomes very anxious and strikes out to meet Titus. He meets him in Macedonia and learns that the severe letter had made its impact. So he sits down, probably in Philippi, and writes 2 Corinthians. The books of 1 and 2 Corinthians reveal Paul's character. Charge after charge is leveled against Paul. He spends a good deal of time in both letters answering these charges. So to put it in a nutshell, 1 Corinthians is the epistle written to answer a church's specific questions. It is an epistle that answers the problems confronted by a pioneer church. It's an epistle written to a carnal church, and they're also diversified. Paul deals with more than one different subjects. Paul deals with more different subjects in 1 Corinthians than he does in any other apostle. So this is where we are going for a while. Let's prepare to hit the streets of Corinth with the apostle. Let's experience the corruption that he saw and hopefully learn how to deal with it, since, as I see it, our modern society is not much different than that in ancient Corinth. So guys, that's it for the first video on Corinthians. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next video. Y'all have a great day.